more attention and more information to the Harvard community about the importance of labor in public policy issues. So we hope you find this event interesting. It's being co-sponsored by the Health and Human Resources Research Center, which has also been started just this year. It's headed by Professor Mary Jo Bain, who's also our moderator this evening. We've also been co-sponsored by the Kennedy School Women's Group, and we'd like to thank these organizations for their help. I'm going to turn it over now to Mary Jo Bain.
I guess I should both thank and compliment our panel and our audience as well for making it out in this ridiculous weather. Thank you for coming. It is, I think, a testament that you have made it and that we have made it to the importance of the issue we're going to be discussing tonight, which has to do with women and changes in the workplace. I think as we were talking beforehand this evening, all of us agreed that perhaps the title of the panel would more accurately have been Women and Changes, ? In the workplace. And I think one of the issues we want to address tonight with all of you and with our panelists is there are really a couple of questions. One is, what are the changes that have taken place and that are taking place in the workplace as they affect women and as the workplace responds to the increasing number of women in the workforce? And perhaps most importantly, what are the changes that need to take place in the future if we are going to achieve a situation where women and men can work together in the workplace? So those are the issues that are before us tonight. We sent our speakers a formidable list of questions. We told them, you have 10 minutes. Would you please talk about affirmative action, maternity leave, women's rights and minority rights, comparable worth, women managers, and considerations for women workers? And I'm sure they're going to do that, each from their own perspective. What we'll do is ask each of our three speakers, who I will introduce in just a minute, to spend 10 minutes or so talking with us from their particular perspective on these issues of women in the workplace. Then we'll kind of ask some general questions and try to get an informal discussion from the audience. I think there are lots of issues that lots of people have things to say about, and that we should make this as informal and much of an exchange as we can. We have three terrific women with us this evening, and I'm delighted to have a chance to have met them and to introduce them to you. They are women from a sector of society that I sometimes think we forget about at the Kennedy School too much as we aspire to be high-class policymakers or rich managers. These are people who have come up from trade unions of various sorts and who continue to be concerned in their work life and in their thinking, not just with a particular segment of women, not just with women policymakers or women managers, but with women in all parts of the workforce. And I think that's what we all need to be focusing our attention on here tonight. So it's a real pleasure to have them with us. The first person who I will ask to talk with us for about 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to the others, is Barbara Hutchison, who's next to me. Barbara is the director of the Women's Affairs Department and the vice president of the American Federation of Government Employees, which is a federal employee union, and a big one at that. She is also vice president of the executive council of the AFL-CIO. Barbara, you said that you would talk to us some about where we are, where we need to move. It's all yours.
Now, I would first like to tell you what I do. I am a director of a women's and human rights program, which our members in our union began back in 1974, and we established a women's department in our union. The director of that department is elected by the national membership, and we have 15 elected district women representatives. And basically what we do is we assure that our union's posture in addressing women's issues, solving their problems, bringing them to the forefront, making sure we have appropriate contract language in areas of daycare, parental leave, promotion, sexual harassment, and those types of things. And I've been doing this since approximately 1980. And in that time period, I've had a chance to kind of look at problems from a whole range of perspectives. Prior to taking this job, I was an attorney with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and then I also worked as in private practice. And so I've had an opportunity in this position as well as others to look at the progress of women in America as we move through this system. And one thing that we are all sure of, and something that employers, labor unions, everyone, universities, the educational community, we are all convinced that women are in the workplace to stay. There is not going to be a return in our lifetime or generations hereafter to the one-wage earner family. And one of the things that has happened is that has had a significant impact on our whole societal structure, not just because of the fact that women went to work, but we are no longer now a one spouse at home, one spouse in the workplace. But for women, it was a significant and traumatic change. And in the past 2 or 3 years, what we have begun to do is to do sort of a review. Women, of course, burst upon the scene with a lot of enthusiasm, vim, and vigor in approximately 1968, 74, and many women were starting into careers where women were not normally employed. And we've moved through that period, and there has been a feeling on the part of many that there is some stagnation, that women are not making the progress that they're making. But over the past 3 years, I served on a committee called the Committee on the Evolution of Work, which the AFL-CIO, we got together and said, let's try to see where we're going as unions, and let's try to see where we feel what issues we need to be addressing for the future. One of the things we found was that the people who had the most receptivity to joining unions are women and minorities, that those are our future members. One of the other things that they wanted when they outlined issues that they wanted to see addressed, they wanted to be treated with dignity. Dignity came in all forms and fashions. Many of them were higher wages. We found that women still remained in the lower wage earning categories, that their average earnings, say in the federal government workforce, where everyone believes that these government workers are earning a high salary, the average woman worker is earning $13,000 a year, whereas her male counterpart is earning $10,000 more on an average. The 70% of women just in the federal government workforce are in what we call the lower paying job categories, which start with what they say grade 7 and below. 70%. And recently we did an analysis with the Housing and Urban Development Department of all places, the United States Housing and Urban Development Department, and in their budget program, all of the managerial staff were male. There were 84 employees. Of the 84, about 24 were managers. They were 100% male, and all of the non-managerial staff were women. That is devastating. But what I think that some of these things are, what's going on is we're beginning to take a more critical look at what really kind of role as a worker a woman is going to have in the workplace. Is it going to be that she's relegated to the menial task? We don't believe so. We do believe that women have a very viable role to play in this society, that the shift from being totally homemakers to being participants in the society have brought many new needs in terms of child care. Those are some of the things we're addressing from our union's perspective and the labor movement overall. I am sure that it's a startling change if you went to some labor leaders 20 years ago and said, are you going to endorse child care for Americans? They would have said no. Today, you find them all saying yes. They are testifying for it. They are lobbying for it. They are negotiating it in their contracts. parental and maternity leave, which you'll hear about later. They are issues which we feel we must place on the front burner. I think that these are bread and butter issues for women workers. One of the things is that everyone always talks about for unions, what are bread and butter issues? For women workers as well as male workers, it is the same. It is whether or not you can improve your standard of living. And so I think that one of the conclusions we've come to is that there are a whole range of items that are now on the agenda for the 80s that have to do with not whether or not women have become liberated, but whether or not women can improve their standard of living. And those are the things that we feel as a union that we wish to address and that we wish to continue to keep out front for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Next, we have Joanne Troy, who is a special assistant to Boston's mayor, Raymond Flynn. She is the mayor's labor liaison, and she is also a member of Bricklayers Local 3, and is going to talk to us, I think, among other things, about some of the issues facing women in non-traditional jobs.
Hi. If you'd asked me 6 years ago if I would be speaking here tonight, I'd more likely say I would be building the building, but it's a pleasure to be here anyway.
Did you build the building?
No, but I did the rehab at Phillips Hall there. So, I think I do currently work now as the labor liaison to Mayor Flynn. I've been there for 3 years since his election, and I handle all issues with regard to outside labor unions and the mayor's office. I still don't quite identify myself with that. I identify myself still with bricklayers, which was probably the most important decision I ever made in my life. Women, we were talking before, and changes in the workplace. It's really changes in the workforce and not so many changes in the workplace. Women are still coming into the workforce in increasing numbers, but they're still going into women's jobs, and women's jobs are not designed to be breadwinning jobs. If you listen to Mr. Icahn and his TWA statements about the flight attendants, it's still hard for people to conceptualize women as breadwinners, as people that have to support themselves and keep a roof over their heads and do all the things that men do. I myself was working as a secretary at Boston University with a basic liberal arts background, trying to decide how you earn a living with a liberal arts background and no advanced degrees. And for me, it turned out to be becoming a bricklayer, going into the building trades. At the time that I entered in 1979, it was extremely unheard of. I was the second woman to join Local 3. But all of the things that we talk about, comparable worth, dignity, feeling of accomplishment, were all things that drew me to that work and that labor union. The men, they still can't figure out what draws you to it, but it's the same things that motivate them, the desire for a good standard of living, for a good day's pay, and to be able to walk away and say, you know, I built that. My favorite thing now in my current position is to have one of those infamous little power breakfasts at the Bostonian. And I let them talk about the policy issues and the things that happen in the mayor's office that everyone thinks are so glamorous. And I always make sure to tell them that I built the building that we were having breakfast in. It's still what's important to me, and still what I think about. Lost track of my thought of there, but all the things that happen to women cannot be addressed by becoming managers, by becoming bosses. There's not that many jobs at the top, and there's still a lot of people that have to support themselves. That's why I am very interested personally in making more and more opportunities available to women in non-traditional jobs. In my current position, we have recently funded a new program for women entering into construction, a pre-apprenticeship program, to give them a kind of step up, to teach them that yes, they can work with their hands, yes, they can build buildings, yes, they can go to work every day and work in a kind of environment that they never dreamed that they would be able to work in. And it's surprising how issues like affordable daycare become less important when your paycheck is not 60% of what your male co-workers are making. When you're making a decent living wage, you can afford things in life that you don't really realize. It really struck me several years ago as we were testifying at the State House for the prevailing wage law, and the building trades turned out an entire droves of people filled Gardner Auditorium and were outraged that the state legislature would think about touching the prevailing wage law. And naturally the women who were members of the building trades came to testify also, because we had fought tooth and nail to get in there, and we didn't want our wages touched either. But when they're talking about wages that are easily 3 times what women make in other kinds of occupations, and they are up there with their statistics and fighting tooth and nail that this is a living wage, we can't possibly live on anything else, it kind of struck me that I wondered what they thought the rest of the women workforce was living on. But that's my own personal story. I think this whole issue of women and how they're going to move into the future and how they're going to live in the future is going to be addressed not only through policies, government policies, but also through women with their own choices and the way that they choose to lead their own lives, living by example, so to speak. It's felt very strongly in the women that go into the non-traditional trades that they are a banner carrier. They are carrying the flag for the people that will come behind them, and that they have a big responsibility to make sure that what they do is quality work, that they can come away at the end of a day and say, yes, I did work, I did do a day's pay, what I did was equal to what everybody else was doing. And you know, the city of Boston now is moving forward. We have a new comparable worth commission. We have, you know, daycare coordinators studying the feasibility of daycare centers, and, you know, all the other things that are going to be necessary to move the future of women in the workplace forward. But I also feel very strongly that women have to take it upon themselves to make sure that they take advantage of the opportunities that come their way. It takes a long time to figure out that you have to work for a living. I didn't figure it out till I was about 30. I kept thinking that something was going to happen. I see 30 years of work stretching out in front of me, and I think, God, gee, I didn't think it was going to be like this. It is. We best learn how to support ourselves.
Thank you, Joanne. The third member of our panel is Janet Walker, who is the Massachusetts State Vice President of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, the President of Local 1164 of the American Federation of Government Employees, and the Women's Representative for District 1 of the American Federation of Government Employees. Janet?
Thank you. I bring you greetings from Joyce Miller, who was unable to attend tonight. Joyce Miller is the National President of the Coalition of Labor Union Women. The coalition was founded in 1976 by a group of union women from various unions across the country who felt that there needed to be a resource to utilize in order to bring forth women's concerns in their own particular union, and that provided a forum and also a way for people to become experienced and be trained in public speaking and all the other things that women normally did not have the exposure or the opportunity to participate in. But I'm here tonight to talk to you a little bit about the relationship between the future of comparable worth and maternity or parental leave, because there is a connection. The issue of comparable worth or pay equity is not only important, but it's also controversial. Important because pay equity or comparable worth is equivalent to equal pay for work of equal value. This means that workers will be paid equitably for the value of the work and the value of the services that they perform. The value would be based upon a point or a scale system for each skill or type of skills that would be necessary to perform a particular job. Therefore, a librarian who is required in most instances to have a master's degree and is required also to have a variety of specialized skills would be eligible to have his or her pay scale reviewed for an increase, because basically librarians are grossly underpaid for the amount of degree work and experience that's necessary for them to perform a job and to even be hired. And you see, the other thing in addition to this is that librarians are generally paid less than bus drivers who drive for the various mass transit systems across the country. And, you know, the skills that a bus driver would need are also would be re-examined under this comparable pay or provision. Generally, bus drivers are not required to have any type of particular degree. They are required to have a Class II driver's license, which, in my estimation, makes me ask the question, which skills or jobs are the most important? The librarian, who's responsible for guiding the students and researchers and others in their projects and studies, such as each of you have utilized their services, I'm sure, or the bus driver who transports people from one destination to another. Now, these bus drivers, true, do have hundreds of people's lives in their hands and are responsible for getting them to these various points safely. However, should the bus driver be paid more than the librarian? That's what is so controversial. Now, you're probably asking, how is this related to parental or maternity leave or parental care? Well, let's look at the face of the problem. Both involve money. That's the bottom line, the dollars. Parental leave would provide job security for workers who would have to be out on leave for either the adoption or for the birth or for the care of an ill child. So therefore, by having job security, that means that that person would be guaranteed their job once they go back. Now, the state of Massachusetts had a bill before the state representatives in the State House to provide this type of care, but they also were providing to have 18 weeks of unpaid leave for workers. But the guarantee would be that they would have their job back. Well, in the lobbying and all the efforts that went forth, we had all the business people coming down saying they couldn't afford it. What couldn't they afford? They couldn't afford to continue the workers' health insurance for those 18 weeks. Now, mind you, we had already done in our efforts a cost analysis, which meant that each worker in the Commonwealth would have to pay approximately 18 cents per week in order to cover this parental leave bill. That would provide for either the father or the mother to have up to 18 weeks. Now, the reason it was done that way was because of the fact that in some instances, perhaps the mother's job she wasn't on a job as long as the spouse and did not have enough, or maybe she earned more than the husband. So she could go back to work and the husband could stay home and take care of the child until the child was eligible or old enough to go to a child care center. But then that provides another problem. In the greater Boston area, there are only 2 infant child care centers, and the cost is astronomical. That's why it's necessary for people to have a decent wage and to provide child care, because that's very important. You know, you hear about all these cases of child abuse more recently, and I come to think that some of these cases are because of frustration on behalf of the parents, where they don't know which way to turn. There are many instances across the Commonwealth where a working parent has to leave an infant with a 7 or 8-year-old. Otherwise, they'll lose their job in order to go back to work. And that's vital because that job is bread and butter and a roof over the head for that family. And as was previously indicated, most families nowadays require 2 incomes just to make the average daily needs, to meet the average daily needs of that family. So going back to parental care or parental leave, the provisions in the federal bill, which is called the Family Leave Act, would not only provide for children, it would provide for parents. Many of us have elderly parents who live with us or live nearby, and many of whom in their older years become ill. There have been cases where a parent who has been ill with cancer and is in the last days, and the hospital recommends that that parent be taken home to just be amidst family with the love and care that's necessary. Parental leave or the Family Leave Bill would provide for leave for that worker, whether it's you or I, to be at home with that parent, to comfort that parent in those last days. Now, everyone can't afford or does not want to send that parent to a hospice in a strange environment with no family, no loved ones nearby. And this would provide that specialized care and need, because don't forget, each one of us one day will reach that age, and that particular point in time when we're older and will need the care of a family and not just an institution. So basically, these are some of the issues that are covered under the Family or Parental Leave Bill, and it all goes back to money. That 18 cents, I'm sure that we all waste more than 18 cents a week. And so that's what it would have cost here in the state of Massachusetts, 18 cents per worker, in order to provide for 18 weeks of unpaid leave. By unpaid, that means that the worker would only get up to a percentage of their wages while they were out if the bill had passed. What has happened now is the bill has been directed to a study committee. But you can see that just as it's important here in Massachusetts, it's vitally important in every other state across the nation, because the more states that pass a bill of this nature would guarantee that the federal government will also pass a comparable bill to cover each and every one of us. So therefore, in the future, hopefully there will be no more frustration with child abuse cases because of frustrated parents not knowing which way to turn. There won't be any elderly parents put in a hospice or a nursing home to die alone because their children can't afford to take a few weeks off to be with them. Comparable worth pay equity would provide monies for people to work and put aside some funds for these particular times, for the time where you know you're planning a family, because everyone has a right to a family, whether it be male or female. So if you're planning a family, that way you can put money aside and have it so that when you are out those 18 weeks or what have you, you'll be able to exist. We've had cases where a woman was denied the leave after additional leave was basically, most companies allow 6 weeks. And this person had her 6 weeks and requested another 3 weeks. And the company refused. Well, this woman, this young woman, very young woman, she just could not, and she was a married woman with a husband who was working, but they weren't making that much, but they needed her income. But she had saved up her leave time, her vacation time, to be out for a certain period of time. And she asked for additional 3 to 6 weeks, and the company refused it. They told her, if you want to work, you better come back, otherwise you won't have a job. And she's concerned about child care for her brand new baby, her first child. Well, she found a sitter, but she was concerned about the child's welfare just because of the fact that it was her first baby, I guess. And I think also she felt inadequate because of the fact that she had to leave a child so young. Well, one day this woman left work and took a drive and jumped off the bridge. Those are the types of things and the pressures that people are put under when there are no provisions for parental or maternity leave. So this is what we're about. This is what we're working for, because it helps us and will help our children tomorrow. Thank you.
I think I will take the moderator's prerogative and ask the first question. Actually, the first six, which was probably abusing the privilege. But I'd like to ask each of the panelists, that's three, to just speak specifically to two questions. All of them have really focused, all of them have come at these questions to some extent in the things they've said already, but maybe just to kind of get us thinking, I'd like to ask each of them first what they think the most important problem facing women in the workforce is over the next 5 years. And then the second question, what's the most important policy initiative for the next 5 years? Joanne, are you game?
Pay equity. That's
Pay.
it in a nutshell. I think that instead of worrying about how we're going to cut the pie up, we have to start asking ourselves why the pie isn't bigger to start with. And that all the issues that really face women are really primarily money issues. The fact that there are not enough daycare centers, I agree, it's an important problem, but I tend to believe in the capitalist system. If people could afford to pay for daycare, there'd be people that would want to provide that service. And I don't think it's that the daycare workers are making an exorbitant salary. They don't make a lot of money. It's the fact that people can't afford to pay for it that is the biggest problem. And so if I could have look into the crystal ball and say what is the biggest problem, it's pay equity. Women's jobs are not designed to be able to afford a family, to be able to live at a decent wage. We have not gotten to the point yet where people think that women have to support themselves. I can't tell you how many times as I worked in the billing trades, I was told that I was taking a job away from a man, or that, what are you doing here? There's some guy loafing that needs this job. And my response always was, hey, you want to pay my mortgage and pay my food bill and give me a little stipend to live on, you can have my job. I don't love working. I like to live. I like to be able to have $1 in my pocket at the end of the week and not have my check, you sitting there waiting for your... I remember as a secretary, you'd be starving all Friday morning because you had to wait for your check, It's pay equity.
Pay equity. Barbara?
I said we're not supposed to respond to the panelists, but my response to the guy who said to me that I took a man's place in law school was, if the man was as good as me, he would have been here. But that's the answer. But what the most important issue for women is most certainly pay. Pay in all forms, pay equity, as well as equal opportunity for progress through an organization, be it an educational institution, the government. The Congresswomen just protested last year about the separate gyms, and their gym was a lousy corner, and the male gym was a luxurious spa. So pay and equal access, I would say, to this system. But the most important policy initiative, and I know that many people disagree on this, but I think it's coming to be a fact, is a national child care policy for this country. There is nothing that has had as tremendous an impact on our society as our failure to address the change of two working parents and child care. It is not a fact that the capitalist system has not responded to fill that gap. They have not responded with decent wages in that area because decent wages are not set for those jobs. There is not any kind of government regulation. State regulation is inconsistent, inadequate, and insufficient. Within every state, George Miller, the congressman, did a study for the past 2 years. He's been going around the country. He had several hearings across the nation, and then he came back to Washington, and they have been going in depth. And this country, for a modern civilized society, should be ashamed. We should really be ashamed. And I think that if we deal with a policy initiative, because that policy initiative is going to fold back into the pay problem as well as address the development of our future. And it's going to impact on us overall, and we need to start talking about it. We really need to get to work on it.
Thanks. Jen, you want to,
Well,
biggest problem, biggest policy initiative?
I say the biggest problem, other than pay, because pay is number one, is upward mobility, which is basically part of what Barbara was saying. The ability to move up through the ranks without being sabotaged. I know someone asked me just last week, what is it that you people want? That I don't think, this person said, I don't think women should be given, or minorities should be given an extra point because they are a woman or because they are a minority. I said, I don't want any extra points. All I want is not to have any obstacles put in my way. If I'm ready for the job, if I have the qualifications, then let me have it. Don't stop me. Don't throw roadblocks in the way. And that's what I feel is the most important thing, because once you can move up without any obstacles, then you're going to definitely have the money. And, if you look at the country today and you see who the leadership is, and then I say, well, to myself, we as women need to be in the leadership, because men have had the leadership all these years, and look where we are. So we have to go up, and that's where the obstacles should not be, so women can move up. As far as legislation, I too think that the child care, parental leave is of the utmost importance. Third world nations, less developed than we, do have some forms of child care. They may not be as glorious as what we have in some of the child care centers here in this country, but they do have provisions for it, and I think it would behoove us to move forward in that area, because what we do for our children today, they are looking and watching us, so that they will have to deal with things affecting older Americans, which we will be tomorrow, and they will have the same concerns, hopefully, that we have, and that we'll be putting forward the effort to pass along.
Thanks. Well, let me open up for comments and questions from all of you. I think the drill is that you're supposed to go over to one of these microphones so that something will happen. You'll be recorded for posterity or something.
Am I supposed to say who I am, too?
That would be a nice thing.
Yeah, Ramon Castablanche. I go to school here. I'm thinking about all the policies that are being advocated right now on behalf of women workers in particular, that the organizations represented here want to lead, are going to require the support of women workers. And more women workers are going to have to be brought into the organizations, AFGE, bricklayers, other labor organizations. It seems to me that the more women workers we get into organized labor, the better chance we're going to have winning these struggles. I'm interested in knowing what particular programs are going on right now in AFGE, bricklayers, other unions that are directed at women workers in particular to bring women into the ranks of organized labor.
Joanne, do you want to start on that? And then I suspect other people will want to come in, too.
Well, in the building trades, bringing women in is still in the embryonic stages. We would be jettisoned tomorrow if they could get away with it. They still are having a hard time. So right now, what has happened, though, the Boston Building Trades Council has joined forces with the Mayor's Office of Jobs and Community Services and the Network of Women in the Trades to do a extensive outreach program to get more women interested in becoming building trades people. The structure of the building trades in and of itself leads itself to an excruciatingly slow process. There's a period of apprenticeship that everyone serves. and then you become a journeyman, and then, you know, journeymen work out their useful lives. I mean, there's 1,500 members of the Bricklayers Union. There's about 14 to under 20 women. I've been all over the country speaking. I've been to their conferences. I've spoken to them. Right now, I couldn't get elected to the Board of Trustees in my own local. So that is women in the leadership is a long way away. They're trying, but it's a very long way away. The electricians have an affirmative action program. They have a special committee for bringing in women and different people of color who come in at later ages, who, you know, they all have age limits on coming into their programs. Some of the unions do have special outreach programs, but it's a function of, we've only been around for about 8 years in this most recent attempt by women to break in, and the average age of the officers, I think, is about 50, so we have a ways to wait.
Barbara, are things any brighter?
Somewhat. I think that you have to look at it in the stages in which you're dealing with. One, the labor movement only began about, what is this, 86 or 87? I've lost track of time. Been in the labor movement too long. It's about 15, 20 years, where they really started even endorsing women's issues. So where they are, I would say the majority of unions, there are certain core groups that are very aggressive. They have women's departments, elected women officers on their international board. They have maybe women's committees. They do women's training material, women's contract language. My union does some of that. The AFL-CIO, I give kudos to. They are now developing a videotape on child care, speaking to the issue from a policy perspective. From the overall AFL-CIO perspective, they are moving forward in terms of the lobbying and endorsement of initiatives, but then they don't have the authority within the unions. The public service unions, I would say, public service sector are the most progressive. After that, you get to the service industry, steel industry, manufacturing, electrical industry. They are the second most progressive. And when you get to the building trades, it is a fact. And what happens is that the ones that get the most publicity, of course, are the worst cases. And what happens is that you see, say, like the Vinson case, where the position was a road crew position once again. And the union's role in that, and there was a union there, was to support Ms. Vinson. And so from that perspective, that's where the outreach is coming on those hardcore areas. The other areas is through training programs. We have recently committed to, we've always had, say, pamphlets and brochures. We're participating in a campaign in Social Security Administration where several of the issues that we're going to address are maternity, paternity leave, and we successfully got federal workers permanent flexi time, working hours, whether the public has varying views on that, but federal workers have flexi time if they want to have it in their collective bargaining agreement. So that those are issues that are important to women, and we do training, we do specific training seminars for women, and so do many of the unions. So those are some of the outreach things. They are not as much media. We have not given as much media attention to it as we really should, and that is one of the things we are attempting to correct through video cassettes and that sort of thing.
Janet, do you want to add to this discussion?
Yes, the Coalition of Labor Union Women has focused in on providing training for women in order for them to go back into their own unions and to move up through that particular union structure and provide input and encourage other women. The problem has been over the years that most of the unions are all headed up by men, and women have little or no chance of moving up through the ranks or gaining any of the experience. So CLU provides that experience with public speaking, with lobbying efforts, teaching women how to lobby on various issues, We've had, here in the greater Boston area, we've had lobbying workshops to train women, to give them the confidence to go up to their state legislator or to their congressman and say, listen, this is how I feel on this particular subject. Even letter writing. A lot of people are apprehensive about writing a letter to a congressperson, you know. And all these types of things are very important because it's their future. The Coalition of Labor Union Women has already done many workshops for women on sexual harassment, which is a very real problem in many of the work sites, and how to deal with it. Because in many instances, the prevailing attitude is that you must have done something to encourage it. And in most cases, it's not that at all. It's just the fact that you have the male counterpart who thinks that they can do whatever they want with women at any time in any kind of setting or forum. All these types of things are what the Coalition of Labor Union Women are doing in order to encourage, in order to teach, educate, and familiarize women with the problems. And these problems are not only women's problems, they're workers' problems. The maternity or parental leave, that's a workers' problem because that child has a mother and a father, and the father is just as responsible for the care of that child and to make sure that child is in a good daycare center, if need be, as the mother. And so all these issues we consider not just to be women's issues, but to be family issues. And the women who are the newest force in the workplace have to be educated and brought up to par on all of these issues. And that's what the Coalition of Labor Union Women is attempting to do nationwide.
I want to make a correction. I said the union supported the plaintiff in the County of San Diego case. They supported the county's position on affirmative action, and they did file amicus briefs, and that is another aspect of that. And there are some good building construction trade unions, too.
Okay.
My name is Maureen Kennedy. I just have a real quick question. Pay equity is a real near and dear issue to my heart. My sense, though, is that it's been taking a bit of a beating in the press. We've been losing a couple of relatively strong cases around the country, including my home state of Alaska. I was wondering if you could talk about what strategies you think have worked out well so far in the pay equity fight, which ones haven't worked out so well, and where you think the issue's going to go or should be going in the next couple of years.
Barbara, is that yours?
I think that the strategy that has worked best has been, notwithstanding the desire to sue, but to get the studies done. And once they get the studies done, I used to poo-poo the studies. I said, oh, what's a study going to do? What a waste of time. But once the study's done, the results are so startling that it's very hard for folks who are opponents to sit and say, gee, there must be some other good reason why these women aren't earning more money. And so in the face of the studies, you find the most opposition. Once you get the study, you find you're on the road to relief. Obviously not immediate relief, but they found ways to phase it in that's very effective. But I do believe that the study approach really is an effective method.
No, I agree with you. We in the city of Boston have just formed a comparable worth commission that is going to start a study, and I have a feeling that when the study is completed, nobody's going to like what it says. So that they tend to pay attention.
Well, basically, if I've addressed already the issue of comparable worth and pay equity, and whatever it takes, that's what I feel. Whatever it takes, do it to get it, because
Even
it's
studies.
too important. Yeah, even studies.
My name is Sue Hoffman. I'm a student here, and I want to greet my union sisters. I'm a former union steward with District 65 UAW, Daycare Human Services local in Massachusetts, and it's nice to have you here. I'm also a licensed oil burner technician and really feel kinship with women in non-traditional trades. But my question is about coalition politics. Only about 20% of the workforce is organized in unions, and less of a percentage of women are organized. I think that's about the percent now in the U.S. So it means that even if women rise up in the labor unions and the labor movement gets stronger, there needs to be more political activity, and coalition politics, I think, is one way to go. What's your experience as women in the labor movement working with other groups, with the women's movement, with other kinds of groups, and what kinds of, in the Democratic Party, I mean, what kinds of coalitions do you see happening in the future?
Barbara, you want to start on that one? I'm sorry.
Jan, yes, you are definitely correct in coalescing. That's what we've been doing. That's what we encourage everyone to do with community activist groups, with churches. Those are the most important because they all recognize the problems. Churches in particular recognize the problem because they are in tune with their people in their congregations. And it's an excellent source which we have tried to utilize in various issues, including this recent parental child care bill. We've also gotten together with other groups to focus in on this particular issue. And this is how you have to do it in order to move forward. We, with not only other labor groups, but institutions such as the A. Philip Randolph Institute, National Organization for Women, which isn't necessarily unionized, but they are working women. I just can't think of all the groups that we've managed to coalesce with and are trying to continue to do so, because all of us realize that that is the most important thing. One of the other things too in coalescing is that we find that even some of the older, more established groups, such as the Gray Panthers, are also very helpful because they too have gone through very difficult times when they were raising their families, and they would like to do something to help us and our children to have a better life. And a classic example of that is the march that they just had in Washington, D.C. for peace and justice in Southern Africa and Central America. And there were enormous groups of the Gray Panthers there. I saw them walking and marching. They'd sit for a little while on the benches on the side of the street, then get back up with their signs and get right back in there and start marching. Those people, everyone, you have to coalesce with everyone and solicit their help because they are willing. And, especially for the older groups, they feel as though this is their contribution. They do have the free time, and they're willing to do it. And let me tell you something. They know a lot more of what's going on in society than we do. They're able to watch those talk shows, CNN, without being interrupted with the phone calls and everything, and they can educate you. I went to a housing development for the elderly with a friend just to visit, and I got an education. All those folks were ready to march on whatever issue came up. So that's how important it is, and that's a resource that we should not forget and should not omit because they're very important.
Joanne, any particular
Well,
Boston group?
yeah, well, I was thinking about her comments there, and it's really two questions you were asking. I mean, do you think of yourself as a woman activist first or a trade unionist first? And the issues that face unions in reaching out into the community and organizing other workers are really a separate issue. And I think that a lot is being done to try to dispel the feelings that people have about trade unions as being self-centered, self-serving, reaching out, in Boston particularly, reaching out into the communities. I work very closely with the Bricklayers and Laborers Nonprofit Housing corporation, which is working with the city of Boston to go out and build affordable housing, home ownership opportunities for people in the community, to show them that, to give something back to the community and to demonstrate that you can build affordable housing and pay prevailing wage, and the two are not inconsistent. So I think that a lot is being done, but I think it's really a two-pronged issue.
Yes. I think we've broken down that barrier that Joanne has alluded to, and your question may have as to whether or not the labor movement has bridged that gap, and we've crossed it, and I believe we have. As you know, we are definitely staunch supporters of the Coalition of Labor Union Women as unions in general, but also the National Organization for Women, the Democratic Women's Caucus, the National Women's Political Caucus. We have all come together as unions, as individual unions, as the AFL-CIO, and I would say that over the past 6 years, we've all come to agreement on which issues we all definitely agree on and which ones we know we're not going to agree on in advance. And so I take that as a massive step forward for all of us, because it did used to be that the women's group said, "Oh, the unions are not doing anything. They're dead. They're dying. Nobody cares about them, and they hate women." I think you will find that, particularly on the national level and many local levels today, that you will find now chapters going to unions for support on legislative issues, for contributions and fundraising, and not because, and then there is the overall agenda that they agree on, and you find the now chapters being supportive of things like the prevailing wage. There was a time when now chapters, in addition, and other women's groups said that the prevailing wage didn't affect them, which I always thought was totally hilarious. I didn't know who these people were, but they weren't working where I used to work. But I think that we bridged that gap. I think the labor movement and the women's rights movement are fully working together. I haven't heard of an argument in several years. You said I live in a lucid. Right.
My name is Nancy Goodman. I go to school here too. I want to follow up on Ms. Hutchinson's point that she made, that concerning the fact that the labor unions and the women's movement seem to be working together well. I've read both that women seem to be more eager to join unions than their male counterparts, and that unions seem to be there's less chance that a union would be organized in a female-dominated workplace. Do you think the former fact, that women are more likely to vote for unions if they come to the workplace, do you think that is because they perceive unions as champion their causes, their bread and butter causes? And if so, why aren't unions going to other places where there are predominantly female workers?
Well, I think they are going to those places. They have some real difficulty. As you know, they launched a nationwide organizing drive against Blue Cross Blue Shield, Prudential, and Equitable. And these things take a long time. There were a lot of scare tactics imposed. Obviously, women who are working in those jobs, loss of a job is a devastating matter. In the past 3 years, there have been organizing attempts at the Federal Reserve Bank, Prudential, Equitable, Blue Cross Blue Shield, some local breakthroughs, no major national breakthroughs. It is an ongoing effort. There have been some changes that we had to make in terms of approaches, organizing approaches. So I think it's a learning and progression process, and that maybe 3-4 years down the road, we're going to make that big breakthrough. In fact, they made one down in the Mississippi Delta area where it was predominantly women, black women, and minorities, and also on the Eastern Shore in Maryland here recently, a poultry plant that was predominantly black women and males, and they organized them. And they organized them with the help of the churches, of all people. Well, it's the old coalition. It's the Civil Rights, Labor, Religious Coalition, and because the issues are the same, they are that these workers really improve their standard of living, and I think that they're going to make those breakthroughs in these areas, but it takes time.
But just for a second, so you think that this is a new policy directive of unions? Their new emphasis?
Oh, yes, I think they are putting more emphasis and direction on it, yes, definitely.
Yeah. I'd like to address that because of the fact that just recently here in the greater Boston area, you saw a hotel workers local, trying to organize workers at the Back Bay Hilton. And you saw a big corporation, John Hancock, going in using all types of tactics. Perhaps you don't realize is that the fact that most of the workers were women and minorities, working in the laundry at the hotel, working in housekeeping, and in the kitchens. And it's amazing that a corporation would use scare tactics, fire workers, which they did, intimidate workers, many of which are foreign nationals or recent immigrants to this country, threatening them with deportation if they join the union. Now, these types of tactics, coupled with corporations across the nation who have the resources available, it's very difficult to organize. But one thing we did find out is that these women, these workers in these hotels and other similar settings, it makes them realize even more so why and how badly they do need a union to come in to protect their rights. Because if there is no union, when the boss says, take off, there is no recourse. There's no advance notice or anything for layoffs or anything. But when you have a union, there is a set standard that has to be met for all workers. And so there can be no indiscriminate firing. There can be no indiscriminate setting of pay levels and those types of things. And it's going to be an ongoing battle, and labor just has to be more innovative, such as Local 26 here in the Boston area with their struggles against John Hancock. And that's just one example of many that have been going on across the country.
Well, adding to that, Local 26, a lot of it is an education process. And the workers, they might have a general sense that they want the union, but when they are faced with these substantial intimidation tactics, it takes a long time for them to really believe that the union is strong enough to really protect them, and sense of trust. You have an organizing drive going on right here at Harvard, targeted at your clerical workers, so it's going on all over the place.
Thank you.
My name's Joseph Room. I'm a student here as well. And I'd like for a moment to have you focus on public sector unions. I, like Maureen, am from the state of Alaska. And oil-dependent economies recently went through something that city governments faced a couple years ago, and that was tremendous reductions in revenues. And it meant layoffs. I was talking with a colleague today in Texas who reported that they're laying off fully a third of state employees in Texas. And of that number being laid off, 30% of those people have worked for 5 or more years in state government. And when they went to look at that, and when we looked at potential layoffs in the state of Alaska, we found that fully 70% of the people that were projected to be laid off met the criteria of affirmative action. And that had to do with sort of an underlying problem that I hope that you'll talk about, and that's which comes first, progress or seniority, and what kinds of creative things are you doing in unions to protect people who are being brought in and who are being members and who are moving up in that membership. It was ironic that in 2 of the locals in our state capital, 2 of the local presidents were laid off. They were both women. And I think it's a critical problem and something that I'd like to hear from you on.
Barbara, would you start us off on that one?
I think that legally, technically, seniority comes first. We've all tinkered around with it. We've talked about it. We've talked about what we can possibly do on a legal basis. You're still with seniority first. One of the approaches that we have taken to it is dealing with these things through our contracts, through the upward mobility programs, and setting aside slots, training slots, so that those slots are a commitment for a certain period of time, so that those people are not caught in the layoff. They're in a set-aside group on a separate layoff schedule because it's a training program. But you do have the adverse impact upon women and minorities because they are still on the lower rungs of the ladder. They're usually the last hired and the first fired. And everybody's tussled with it. I myself, when I was in private practice and worked for the EEOC, the question was in structuring an affirmative action program for an employer where I'm making a settlement, can I demand that he waive that seniority for those people? I couldn't. I could demand it if he was discriminating and laying off people, but if he was running that fair and square, there was no way. You're really taking away a person's interest. In other words, they put in their time, and you are, saying that because of that should be set aside, that their interest that they've accrued should be set aside. So in that sense, no. On the promotion side of the scale, where people say, well, it shouldn't be set aside there either, the fact of the matter is, generally in most of those instances, the people who were being advanced or fast-paced had been held back by some pattern or practice or other. And the other persons had progressed at their normal rate, but to the detriment of someone else. So everybody has tussled with that. It is the most tragic side of affirmative action, but it is a fact. It is something I accepted at least 10 years ago, that unless we would do a legislative change in this country, and then you would have to study the impact such a change would have, I would not recommend that we tinker with it on a day-by-day basis, except through dealing with that upward mobility set-aside situation.
Well, you said a few mouthfuls there with your question. I was just trying to jot down some points to focus in on. For instance, I think that it's incumbent on any state or any company to have a vision for the future. For years, for the last 15 or 20 years even, I remember people talking about oil not lasting, and that there should be some other fuel in the future. And I think that's one of the things that many of the states have not focused in on, is some vision for the future, should their oil resources run out or circumstances change. The other thing that I think has to be focused on is retraining for these workers, because I think that along with the vision for planning for the future, those same workers who are working in that particular field or any field that has been phased out could be retrained and given enough education to help the state or that particular company look to the future. I think those two things coupled together would make a big difference, because a lot of workers, and particularly women, have a lot of great ideas. And if any of those ideas are channeled into any particular source, like your legislators have a brainstorming division at some place, I think it's out in Oklahoma or somewhere where they usually go. I can't remember the name of the place of it. However, I think that workers also have enough of an idea as to what they see themselves, and that if managers and management would listen, truly listen, not just give them a snow job, that they would be able to avert some of these problems with the layoffs and provide some sort of retraining in related fields or even in different fields. One of the things that I see going on too is that a lot of clerical work is being sent out of the country to be done in Central America. And that means that there's going to be a loss of work for a lot of clerical people here. Like, for instance, women who work in the banks, keying in the checks as they pass through their station. Those types of things are being contracted out and sent to foreign countries where people do it for $1 a day. So what are these clerical workers here in the United States going to do? What are these key punch operators or whatever the terminology is for that particular position? Those are the types of things that have to be looked at and plans for the future. I think that's important.
You think that?
No, I just feel basically going along with what Ms. Hutchison said is that fair and equitable treatment is a foundation for unions, and that's what attracts people, is the knowledge that they're secure in the contract and the language, and seniority is the ultimate decision making when layoffs take place.
I have another hard question. My name is Rachel Feldman, and I'm a student here. And for the last 8 years, I've been a manager in healthcare and human services with a largely female workforce. And one of the things that has concerned me the most and continues to concern me, and I think it's a potentially divisive and very disturbing force, is the divisions between age, between older workers and younger workers. And I've seen this acted out in some very unpleasant ways among women who I think are probably very sensitive to the issues of aging but haven't provided for their retirements. I've seen older women workers getting into major conflicts with younger women in trying to negotiate for what is equitable. And I haven't seen management, unions, or very many people address that. I think it's going to be an increasingly difficult and pressing issue for us all.
Joanne is the youngest one. Do you want to start?
Well, I'm not really 100% sure what the answer to the question is. As I said before, I think one of the biggest changes that are going to come to take place are women learning that they have to provide for their own future and think into the future. It takes place, it's not just women. I think it's workers in general. I find it taking place when pay increases come along, and in the building trades, you basically vote where your pay is going to go, and the older workers want it to go into the annuities and into the pension, and the younger workers want it in their envelope so that they can spend it right now. So I don't think it's just an issue that's relegated just to women. I think that it's more pressing with women because more and more older women are being forced into untenable positions by not having adequate provision for their old age. But I don't see it as just a woman's issue.
I say you struck on the women's issue of the 80s, and that is how we as women see ourselves. And I think that if anything that we have not done as women, this is as women individually, is deal with how we view ourselves and how we project ourselves to others. And I know we're beginning to talk about it a bit more as women, but I think that we banded ourselves into these very narrowly defined things of you're the woman who works, you're the woman who stays at home, you're the woman who does this, or you're the woman who does that. And I think that what you're asking about is how are women going to redefine women? Not only, although I personally preach this stuff in my union to my women members, I don't think that is the business of anyone other than women, unfortunately. I think that we as women have to redefine ourselves. The age factor cannot be permitted to be the single determining thing that's causing the problem, because it really is how women define themselves that I think you speak to. Age is definitely a problem, and it's going to be a future problem, but not with this issue.
Anything to add?
Well, one of the things that I have been thinking about is that the issue is a workers' issue. I don't think it's just a women's issue, because when you look in the newspapers these days, you see companies trying to force workers to initiate a two-tier wage system, which means that the newer workers coming on board automatically will start off with a lot less. Now, it's incumbent upon all workers to make sure that everyone starts getting paid the going rate for that particular job. And I think that because of many managers or many management companies, whatever the situation may be, they're trying to define what the women or what workers should be thinking about and trying to separate them. And we must not forget that old adage about united you stand, divided you fall. And so this two-tier wage system is nothing but a mechanism to divide workers. And so when you have that division, then you're going to have all sorts of problems, be it male or female, because the two-tier wage system affects all workers, all new workers coming on board. And that will ultimately affect them later on when it's time for them to retire. So I think that's where we have to look for the problem.
I'm going to make this the last question.
My name is Tom Greeley, and I'm a labor organizer with the Harvard Union of Clerical and Technical Workers.
All right.
We are trying to organize the 3,600 clerical and technical workers at this university. 75% are women. Our organizing staff composed of 10 or 7 women and 1 of 3 men. And it's one problem that we run into in trying to empower women at this university is Harvard itself. Harvard has been resisting our union drive, and it's great that you offer somebody like me and our union a forum for this, because Harvard hasn't yet. I would like to say one thing about daycare at Harvard University. There are 6 daycare centers at Harvard University. The one at the business school costs $800 a month to send your children to, and the average employee makes $15,000 a year here. Figure it out. Women aren't really given a chance to enter this labor force if they have children. And if we form a union here, which we're working toward, it's going really well. We're trying to form a coalition too, and we're having a big celebration May 7th, next Thursday night at the Old Cambridge Baptist Church. You're all invited to come in. And
do you have a question?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to bring this up because it's great for me to have a forum to talk to you about this. But it's like, this is real life, and it's great to have a panel, but we're talking about real life too here.
Make sure you organize those daycare workers so they can get a decent living wage.
Okay.
Want to add anything on this?
Good luck.
Well, let me before Mary Ellen takes
Well, you said
over.
that was the last question. I have 2 questions.
Okay.
One is, I think there'd be a lot of us here who would enjoy your comments, Mary Jo, on anything that you think is pertinent. And the other is a question to the, sort of an open-ended question to the audience. When you're done, we're having a reception for our panels, and you're all welcome to join us in the faculty dining. That's not a question.
Yeah, great. For me to make any comments that would stand in the way of getting to a reception would clearly not be the way to make friends and influence people. So I think I won't. But let me thank our panel very, very much just for being here. And I think I'd like to reinforce, I suppose, the statement of the last non-questioner, and to just say that it's a real pleasure for me to be part of an event like this at the Kennedy School, and it's a great joy. And I would also, once again, like to thank the audience for expressing their interest by coming out in dreadful weather. Thank you very much. Where's the reception, Mary Ellen? In the faculty dining room. The reception is in the faculty dining room, which you can find. Thank you all.
In fact, you may all be here.